Welcome to Centaur Financial Services Podcast. The information provided on and made available through this video and podcast does not constitute as financial product advice. The information is of a general nature only and does not take into account your individual objectives, financial situation or needs. It should not be used, relied upon, or treated as a substitute for specific professional advice. We recommend that you obtain your own independent professional advice before making any decision in relation to your particular requirements or circumstances.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 3 of our retirement series, Making Your Money Last. We think that this one's going to be one of the most exciting ones because it's one of the most common questions that we get asked. So let's jump straight into it because I want this to be quick and punchy. So from our point of view, we've already talked about avoiding pitfalls in retirement and boosting super. So now we're really into where the rubber hits the road. We know that people are living longer than ever before. And we know that the cost of living is only going north. So one of the really important things is even through all the noise, all the narratives that are going on, how do we stick to a plan to make sure our income lasts? And we've got a few tips here that we've kind of thrown together that really have stood the test of time. So without further ado, welcome Anthony, welcome Nick.
Thank you, mate.
You have the floor.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, so I always love, and one of I remember a saying a client told me was, it's always good to talk about when the end of the ruler is for them and talking about how long their money is going to last. And unfortunately, it is one of the biggest risks for a lot of pre-retirees and retirees and one of the biggest concerns for them as well. You know, it's very, very real that a lot of Australians today are definitely living longer. I think recent stats in the ABS say that for women, they're living to on average up to 86 and men up to 83. So making sure your strategy sort of aligns to that longevity piece is pretty key in that respect.
That makes sense. I mean, one of the biggest concerns for retirees, one is around that longevity. How long will my money last? Will I run out of money? But something that's, I suppose, more timely now is the inflation risk that really has come on the table in the last 12, 18 months and is starting to see that effect flow through to that spending creep on one side, but the cost of living, everything's more expensive. So having that in the back of mind, knowing inflation is a key consideration in how long your money is going to last, and overcoming that inflation, ensuring that you're at a minimum achieving that inflation target so your buying power doesn't cease.
So we know that if inflation's sort of 3% and you're spending 5% per year, you've got to be earning that 8%.
Yeah.
And kind of to do that, you've got to be invested in the market. We're not getting that out of a term deposit or a government bond. But when you're in there, now you've got market risk. Yeah. So we've got the volatility of the market. And right now, as we're filming this, we've got Trump introducing all the tariffs. Yeah. And the markets are a bit chaotic. They've jumped. Volatility is both high and low. But it can be disturbing there for clients. And you can really get into that point where you think you've got to make a call and you've got to do something. And sometimes doing nothing is a strategy if we've built a good, robust plan. We always, think about, if you need to sell a growth asset, say you need $1,000 and the share price of stock A is 100, then you only need to sell down 10 to get your $1,000. But if there's the volatility in that same share goes down to 50, even if it has nothing to do with what's going on in the greater world, its earnings are still resilient. To get that same $1,000, you'd have to sell down 20 shares. Yeah. So when the market ultimately recovers, you'd be without those shares. So part of our sort of portfolio construction is that you never sell down your growth assets in a bad market, and that's how you avoid market risk. So then what we are then saying is how are we going to make sure that people have sustainable drawdown rates, withdrawal rates? For me, the stuff that we've always looked at is if retirement seems to be around that 30 years and you draw between 4 to 6% of your balance, you're probably not going to touch your capital. That'll just be the earnings, that'll counter the inflation, and it'll be there for you for long term. Yeah. If you draw between 2 to 4% of your money, your portfolio is just going to grow over 30 years, which probably means you're not living necessarily the lifestyle that you want to live. And if you draw 6 to 8% of your money, generally over 30 years, you'll run that down. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't want there to be that perception of saying drawing money down in retirement is a bad thing, right? We shouldn't have the goal effectively to die with the same amount in your super, in your savings that you started retirement.
You want your last check to bounce.
Exactly right. So it's about understanding, okay, well, when we do withdraw money, is it a growth market? Is it a bit more volatile market? And is the portfolio set up, as you say, for that volatility? And I suppose that comes into withdrawals as well. If you're not running a strategy where there's sufficient amount in cash during a bad market, it may mean that the withdrawal rate just needs to change. And there's a conversation around that, and there's future planning to ensure you don't fall into that situation. But it's just something to consider and saying, okay, if we've got quite an extensive market drawdown at this stage, do I need to take out that $50,000 for a holiday right now? Or is this something that I can future plan when we've got good markets? And it works both sides. So when markets have done well, is it time to take some of that off the table to update your cash holdings? There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's more so just that perception and understanding of, well, what's the withdrawal rate look like in different market conditions?
Yeah, I think the big thing to note there, Nick, is probably just making sure we're having those conversations with our advisors. If you remember rightly, back in the pandemic, the government did change the rules on sort of drawdown rates for retirees. So, I remember pretty vividly having several conversations with clients around, do we just keep it there because of what's happening in the markets, and making sure you're not in a position where you're having to sell some of those growth assets that you've got invested, so you're really protecting your position. I think having that conversation with your advisor, even now, where we can go through a bit of a process around, what does it look like for the longer term in the event we just slow things down in terms of withdrawal rates and keep it there for 6 to 12 months. What does that then look like? And all of this is just so you can then make an informed decision around what's right for you, what's right for your family, and importantly, what's right for your retirement plan, so we can continue on in the way we need to.
I think the two biggest enemies to the investor are fear and greed.
Absolutely.
And they're emotional biases that we've just got to really seek expert guidance during those periods.
And on that as well, you mentioned growth assets, right? And you may think, okay, well, if there's a risk of losing money in drawdown phase, why not just hold it all in cash and fixed income if it's going to pay me 4%? And it still comes back to that inflation issue. The purchasing power, that gets eroded as inflation is higher. So it is imperative to have growth assets throughout retirement. You don't sell down at the start of retirement to all cash. There is the need to have those growth assets and an allocation to them. Whilst they may go through cycles with the market, they are, over that long-term period, providing you good growth and income on both sides of the fence there.
There's a great chart that shows historic term deposits, the $100,000 and the different rates of interest that it earns. And then it shows if you had just put in the all-industrial share market, the income, although it started less than what the term deposit was, is now far greater than what the interest earned, plus you've had the capital growth.
Yes.
Which really just says, the ultimate portfolio is to have a bit of each.
Yeah.
We know that diversification isn't sexy, but it is the one free lunch you get in investing, that there is protection there. And during the global financial crisis, the period where Anthony and I still had hair, not quite as good as Nick's, not quite. But that was the seesaw effect where the shares went down and bonds went up in value.
Yep.
And people have short-term memories. Bonds haven't been very good. In 2022, they weren't good. But that was an anomaly. That was that's happened 3 or 4 times in the history of, the share market. So from that, having a diversified portfolio and making sure you're aware where your pockets of risk are. Yeah. So if you're in blue chip Australian shares or global shares, that's relatively low risk. It's got to be a really poorly run business to lose money, and you're going to get lots of warning signs. Now, with government bonds, corporate bonds, you can feel pretty safe. It's very rare that, corporate bonds, government bonds don't pay out. So I think from that, even in times like now where volatility is present, it's about those clients saying, okay, I am in a diversified portfolio. Yeah. This too shall pass, and we will get through the other side. If anything, the volatility just presents an opportunity to buy things that were 100 and now 80. Well, great, they're on sale.
Probably one of the things I get asked is, what is really a diversified portfolio? And, the age-old concept of a balanced portfolio, which has 60% growth assets and 40% defensive assets. But also then what does that look like? So just giving you an example, like having a diversified portfolio means you've got a good mix of those Australian shares, international shares, listed property, then those defensive assets. We've got cash, you've got bonds and cash and equivalents. And ensuring you've got it in that strategy can help over the long term. Speaking of charts, like you mentioned, there's one really good chart that sort of illustrates the fact that one asset class doesn't return the same way each and every year. And making sure you have that diversity within the assets you hold ensures that you're sort of protecting yourself. So through the good and bad times, one good, you're opportunistic, you're making the most of those opportune times in terms of the returns. But on the other side of the coin, in terms of downside risk, making sure you've got those defensive assets in play to make sure you're protecting your wealth in going into your retirement. When we talk about protecting our wealth as well, we talked about drawdown rates, we've talked about how we're investing your money. One of the other things, of course, that we definitely need to talk about in retirement is maximising Centrelink. Sometimes it can be very simple as having a conversation with your advisor around, what should we be doing on a Centrelink front? How could we potentially restructure what we're holding in our retirement capital to make the most of what we've got within Centrelink? And that's not just the age pension, there's Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, low income cards, things that we can sort of assist with to make sure you're getting the best outcome with age pension. And when we talk about restructuring, there's one example in particular. It's if we've got I'm older than my partner by a few years, and I'm of pension age, but my partner's not. There's the ability to move things around that we can really then maximise what you're doing with Centrelink. So having that chat with your advisor can really help with this thing.
I mean, if you're maximising Centrelink for one member of that couple over 3 years, it's close to 90,000
Absolutely.
in money that you wouldn't have had before just by moving some buckets around. I suppose the other thing to think about is tax. So we pay tax all of our lives. Why should we continue paying it throughout your retirement, especially if you're not earning an income? And a lot of that comes down to structures. So we could hold all the same assets theoretically between whether it's personally, through trusts, through companies, and even through superannuation, depending on what type of account you do have. But the importance of having the right assets in the right structure really compound into those retirement years, because effectively you can get to a point where you're paying little to no tax in your later years. But by structuring things the wrong way, holding more assets personally, still holding the investment property in the personal name, even then you're paying tax all the way throughout, especially not only from an income standpoint, but when you're starting to liquidate assets and sell them down by way of capital gains tax. So I'll always say superannuation is one of the best tax structures we have in Australia. You have the restriction there as you're accumulating, but whilst you're in this drawdown phase of retirement, it's actually the most flexible period you can really have when it comes to superannuation, because you're at a time where you can add money in, but also take it out, whilst having a 0% tax rate in most cases.
Yeah, a trifecta of
It's no brainer.
zero tax on personal income, zero tax on growth within the fund, zero tax on income within the fund. It's rare you're going to get a tax trifecta.
Correct.
And I think the stuff we've seen over the past few years when we're reviewing clients is the age-based limits have changed. The concessional contribution limits, the non-concessional contribution limits, downsizer has come in. So this is the importance of regularly reviewing what we're doing, because although we set it up at one point in time to kind of elevate you from this position to this position, we're then trying to maximize it year on year on. And that's the importance of always us being up to date, not just with the legislation side, the technical, the tax, the age pension, because those limits are always increasing as well. So people that weren't qualifying a few years ago might now qualify. But it's also what's going on with the greater economy. Trump, tariffs, interest rates going down. There's a lot of things that are impacting, and it's just always good just to check in with your regular reviews and us go through that kind of that diagnostic to say, okay, what do we need to do? We've just recently looked at all the clients and their certain ages that they turn so we can maximise their benefits. So there's lots of work to be done with regular reviews, especially around the Centrelink and around how that we get that tax efficiency. I can just think of the last 5 meetings we've all kind of had. There's always been something to do with tax and how do we save tax and remove that. So from sort of the practical steps side of things, for me, you can only control the controllables. So we can't necessarily control the markets. There's lots of things we can't control, but you can always just review your spending, review your budget. You know, some of the clients there, they're calling, you know, Foxtel once a year to negotiate, you know, saying I want to cancel it. So then they get the discount. So you can always look to put in your calendar, your diary, once a year, call all those places and try and see. The majority of those big, you know, big massive institutions and corporates, they will give you discounts to retain your business. They're not great on the loyalty side of things, but their retention is important to them. So I think that's a big thing. And review the spending in your insurances. If you can pay annual lump sums, you might get a little bit cheaper than if you pay month by month. So you can do some smart spending that's really low hanging fruit, and kind of track a little bit. We talk about the reverse budget. Track that reverse budget. If you start with 50 grand in your bank account and you have your pension money coming in, at the end of the year, do you still have 50 grand? If you've got less, it means you've spent more. If you've got more, it means you've spent less. So we can always figure that out. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I suppose my takeaway would be the importance of portfolio construction, or even at a higher level, asset allocation. So having a good level of growth assets, your shares, your property trusts, etc. But also on the defensive side as well, your cash and your fixed income instruments, purely to make that portfolio something that's going to generate income but still there for growth as well when the good times are there too. I suppose the cash and fixed income portion is the safety net. You've got access to capital for a period of time, irrespective of what markets are doing. So when we do have good markets, we'll take some cream off the top. When we don't, we know that we've got our backstop there to ensure that income's still coming through those retirement years.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I'd probably just reiterate the point I made before around just maximising your government assistance and social security. So just having a chat, just saying, look, things have changed. You know, we've gone on this holiday, we've done these renovations. How does it look now, especially if you're on the cusp of those particular means testing limits? But importantly, probably more on the fact that when we're preparing for retirement, definitely having a conversation with an advisor to ensure you've got strategies in place to know that you will and can maximise what you're getting from Centrelink.
Mm-hmm. So kind of recapping today, we've talked about three main themes: managing our withdrawals, balancing our portfolio even throughout the volatility, and making the most of government support. If we do that, we're really going to get around that longevity risk, that inflation risk, and that sequencing risk. And you're going to really enjoy that sustainable retirement income.
Yeah.
Nick, what's your call to action?
Well, coming back to there's the asset allocation, which makes sense to me. I suppose understanding the crux of your portfolio, what's the purpose of each of the assets that are there. But at the end of the day, it's really going to be the asset allocation. That's the big one for me.
Cool. Yeah, so for me, it's just review your plan, stay in contact, ask the questions we need to ask, and yeah, especially ask. Don't sit back. Ensure that you're letting us know, especially on two fronts. One, things you want to know about you, but also the other side of why we're doing these is so we can continue to educate and provide you that information. So if you see an opportunity that you'd like to hear something different from us, please don't hesitate. I know, just reading my quick notes here, we're really looking forward to our next episode. We'll be talking about downsizing, investing, or staying put. So looking forward to that chat and what we'll be going through there. So yeah, mate.
That's great. I think, again, final takeaway for me is going to be the goal of all this is peace of mind in retirement. Like, really, we always talk about that sleep at night test. And from us, that's what we want for you guys, is that we'll stress about it, we'll worry about it, have the conversations with us, so that you, when you leave this meeting room, when you leave this office, you go, we're okay. Because our goal is that you live your best retirement, and you live your best life. And I think where we can really help is there's going to be times you feel you can't spend money, and we're actually going to help you by encouraging you to spend the money so that you can have the great things now, and enjoy those experiences, because, you know, while still then having your money at the end, which we might need for aged care or whatnot. So with that, we've tried to keep it short and sharp. Thank you very much. Anthony. Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.